Weeks of demonstrations followed by a deadly crackdown. On March 27th, at least 114 unarmed civilians, including a 5-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl, were killed by Myanmar security forces. A day that marked the deadliest crackdown by the military junta since the coup of February 1st, when the democratically elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD party was ousted and imprisoned. This was also the day when the military celebrated the Armed Forces Day. During a parade in the capital Naypyitaw, General Min Aung Hlaing, the junta's leader, said that the military would protect the people and strive for democracy. Meanwhile, pro-democracy protesters were being hunted down and killed in several parts of the country. As the bloodshed unfolded, several countries across the world registered their condemnation against the military action. The defense chiefs of 12 countries, including Britain, Japan, United States, and Australia, condemned the military's use of lethal force against civilians. The United States also suspended a trade agreement with Myanmar and said it would only restore the agreement once democracy was restored in the country. The European Union delegation to Myanmar said the 76th Armed Forces Day would stay engraved as a day of terror and dishonor. In the midst of these strong condemnations, what has been the response of the Indian government? There were only 8 countries which chose to send a representative to attend Myanmar's Armed Forces Day military parade on March 27th. One of them was India. The others were Russia, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. As news of India's participation in the parade emerged, outrage by pro-democracy protesters began to flood on social media. Civil Disobedience, a Myanmar pro-democracy movement, took to Twitter to express their disappointment. It asked why India, one of the greatest democracies in the world, sent a representative to shake hands with the generals whose hands are soaked with our blood. The Committee for the Protection of Yodongsu Luton, which is an anti-junta group of elected NLD lawmakers, issued a strongly worded statement. I cannot express enough the pain it causes all of the people of Myanmar to see some foreign diplomats today alongside Min Aung Hlaing and his henchmen, at the same time that people were being murdered throughout the country, it read. The statement also mentions that foreign diplomats who attended this shameful Armed Forces Day are a disgrace to their own people, their governments, and to the international community. India's response to this crisis also included denial of food and shelter to people from Myanmar fleeing from the bloodshed. On March 26, the government of Manipur issued an order stating that in the wake of the events in Myanmar, people trying to enter or seek refuge should be politely turned away. It added that only medical attention could be provided in the case of grievous injuries on humanitarian consideration. As widespread criticism followed, the Manipur government on March 29th withdrew the earlier order. Issuing a fresh notification, the government said the contents of the earlier letter have been misconstrued and the state government continues to provide all aid. The Home Department did not clarify what part of the first order had been misconstrued. Dr. Happymon Jacon, founder of the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, elaborates on India's peculiar stand regarding the crisis in Myanmar.
No claim to, safeguarding India's strategic interests vis-a-vis Myanmar can actually justify what I think the government of India is doing, or the instructions passed on to the various governments in the northeast of India. To deny refuge to the helpless refugees knocking on India's doors. I think no claim to strategic interest can justify that. I think that's completely antithetical to the character of us as a country. And I think by having participated in the military parade that the Myanmarese junta organized the other day. I understand that many countries, neighboring countries like Bangladesh also participated in that, but I think perhaps that was avoidable, number one. Number two, the junta is not the only stakeholder in Myanmar at this point of time. There are several stakeholders in Myanmar, and I think engaging only the junta may not be strategically all that wise at this point of time. And given the kind of pressure on the junta, I don't know if it would be able to kill its way into stability in Myanmar. It's possible that the junta will perhaps, will be stopped in the tracks, and you may see a different political dispensation in Myanmar in the months to come. So if India were to put all its eggs in one basket, and that of the Myanmar wouldn't, I don't think that's a very wise policy. In any case, I think being a bigger neighbor, having a historic relationship with Myanmar, India has a responsibility to sort of engage the various, stakeholders within Myanmar. And to that extent, I would say, I've spoken about in the past, I think it is important that India sends a really high-powered delegation to Myanmar to engage the various stakeholders there. Sitting, being neutral, doing nothing. I think these are really not the options that India has at this point of time. I think things have gone beyond that in Myanmar, and I think we have, as a neighbor, we have a responsibility towards the people of Myanmar, and sort of fulfilling that responsibility is not only for Myanmar; it's also, I think, in our own strategic interest to do so.
Siddharth Varadarajan, a founding editor of The Wire, highlights India's attempt at appeasing the military in Myanmar and its attitude towards the refugees that are making their way to the country in this time of crisis.
At the foreign policy level, the government is clearly so preoccupied with the geopolitical rivalry with China and the fear that if the Burmese military is not mollycoddled and is not somehow appeased, then this will leave Myanmar with no option but to draw closer to the Chinese. This has historically been India's problem vis-a-vis Myanmar, and for long years this led to a certain kind of ambivalence about supporting the democracy movement. But events over the last decade, particularly the power sharing which happened in that country, somehow made it easier for India to deal with the Burmese military at the level of state-to-state relations and address all of its security concerns vis-a-vis China and Indian insurgent groups on the one hand, while at the same time supporting the legitimate democratic aspirations of the people of Myanmar for an end to the military's decisive say in that country's affairs. Now, what the coup has done is that it has forced the government of India to essentially pick sides. And even though there's been, official commitment to the need for reconciliation and for the Myanmar authorities to deal with the situation in a peaceful manner and so on and so forth, but the fact is that given the widespread public anger and protests in Myanmar against what the army has done, the government of India has, in a number of ways, cut itself off from that country's democratic opposition and from the democratic aspirations of the people of Myanmar. And in the most brazen way, this was seen by India's decision to take part in the military day parade at Naypyitaw, Myanmar's capital, on the very day that the Burmese army gunned down 114 civilians in different towns and cities of the country. As far as the question of human rights and refugees and what I would say is India's legal and constitutional obligations, I'm afraid the Modi government has tied itself in knots. You have a situation where, in the face of terrible repression in Burma, you have refugees crossing over in Mizoram, in Manipur, and the center is clearly sending a message to the state governments to block the entry of refugees or to ensure that more of them don't come. In the case of Mizoram, instructions were given, in fact, for them to be sent back, which is a crazy and absurd demand to make, because the first principle of refugee movement under international law is that you do not send people back to you do not send people who have fled their homeland in the face of a well-founded fear of persecution if their return is going to endanger their lives in any way. And clearly, given the kind of violence and repression that's been unleashed in Myanmar, sending refugees back at this moment is a recipe for disaster. Earlier too, we've seen the government of India's attitude towards the Rohingya refugees. There are perhaps a few thousand Rohingya refugees who are in Jammu, in Delhi, in Hyderabad, and some other cities, who are part of what India acknowledges at the international level to be forcibly displaced people. If you look at the India-Bangladesh joint statement issued just recently in Dhaka, India refers to the Rohingya as forcibly displaced persons. So if they're forcibly displaced, how can the government of India countenance returning these forcibly displaced persons back to Myanmar, where they face obviously great danger to their life and personal liberty? So I think that India has an obligation to look after refugees, regardless of their religion, regardless of their place of origin. If they come to India and seek refuge in the face of threats to their life, India, like every other country in the world, has an international legal obligation to not send them back to their countries where they would face danger. And if you look at the stand taken by the Modi government in the Supreme Court and in other official declarations domestically, clearly the aim is to send refugees back even though they face near certain risk of death or incarceration.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.